Let's get traumatic. Welcome to another episode of the Truth and Art podcast series. I am your guide, Connor Fowler, joined by co-host Antoni.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's episode, we will be discussing, let's say, a touchy subject possibly for a lot of people, childhood and reimagining your childhood. And what is childhood, I suppose, even though it seems like a pretty straightforward question, but it means so much more. Antoni, why don't you take us through what you perceive to be the memory of childhood?
Of my own childhood?
Possibly your own. I mean, you don't have to get personal.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to remember anybody else's. I have no idea.
Oh, no, that's a good point.
Oh, I see what you mean. Right. Okay, let's start again. Well, actually, that's a really interesting question because, of course, it's absolutely normal to blame your parents for
everything.
Yes, for everything that you don't like about yourself, obviously, or your life. And I remember the moment when I decided that I wasn't going to blame my parents anymore. And what a turning point in my life that was. And I was probably about 23 when that happened. But what a liberation, because suddenly, by owning it all, I could change it. And that seems strange because people often will argue that, you know, your experiences from childhood and your memories from childhood are fixed. They're facts. And therefore, how does you taking all the responsibility onto yourself change anything? But what I realized a few really kind of life-changing things. One was, you can't change anyone else. You can't, you can try and try, but ultimately it's only yourself that you have any power over. The other thing I realized was that my memory of my own childhood was not actually factual. It was my perception at that time, at that age, from, 3 feet off the ground, from whatever, because other people, my siblings, my cousins, would remember a situation very differently from how I recalled it. And I started to realize that my memory was not an infallible photographic recording. It was an emotional, changeable diorama.
Yeah. No, you said some really cool things there, and I do agree with you in that sense. And it's pretty well known around now that memory, probably even before, that memory's not really that consistent or reliable.
I didn't know that, though.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you don't know that as a child, right? I have a perfect example of that, actually. When I grew up for a bit of time in the Netherlands, I returned to the home in which I was about, let's say, 3 to 4 years old. So I was quite a small, I was a toddler. I still had some memories about the place. And one of the fondest memories I had was cycling. Well, I say cycling. I got my mom to push me on a trike, essentially. But being allowed to explore the end of the street, thinking, or rather remembering how far that was in my mind.
Yeah.
It was like, my God, we had so much fun down the canal. There was this massive road that led to the house, and it was this whole scary large world when I got to the end of the road and thought, this is the precipice. This is where I become a man. Or let's say where my at 4.
I get it. Yep.
So I go back there, and we're cycling down that street.
When did you go back there? Like, how old were you?
I was 22.
Okay, so
21.
you were an adult and you went back.
I was an adult. Yeah, I was an adult. So I went back there. I saw the house, and I was thinking, the first thing I saw was, my God, it's so much smaller than I remember,
Yes.
but like way smaller than I remember.
Yeah.
And the road, I looked from the door of the house where I used to live in to the end of the street, which I perceived to be just, massive, ended up being like, I don't know, 7 feet.
Wow, crazy.
We're talking really short.
Right,
It's you get out the driveway, you go down the road, and it's maybe at maximum, let's say, 10 feet.
Right.
To the end of the street.
Yep.
And that seemed like it was miles long. And, that's my real world example of how my memory of that childhood, let's say, exploration was very colored by literally my size,
Yes.
you know. And it was a perception at the end of the day, even though back then it was reality, you know. And that's the, let's say, the thing I wanted to get into about, you know, your memory of childhood, and how we talked about this a little bit in a past episode, and I use past quite ironically here, I believe, because we specifically spoke about the past as being a form of, or a sort of death energy.
Yes, that's right.
Letting go of the past and all
yes.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nebulous area, you know, and it's precisely memory that allows it to be like that. Because our memory, to my experience of it at least, is a sort of gateway into the past, or rather a tool to allow you to perceive the past. But it's not it's not precise because it's based on emotion.
Yes.
As you're saying earlier. An emotion is, in that sense, eternal. The sort of thing that you perceive to be your childhood, for example, let's say happiness, is an eternal feeling. You'll still feel that now, when you remember that moment, right? So it's kind of an interesting, let's say, expression of the past, and how it lives on through the emotion that's attached to it.
Yes.
So I think childhood, or rather the memory of childhood, is such an emotional thing. And you were saying earlier it was all about, you know, blaming your parents for all your faults, and coming to that realization that you, to a certain degree, did that yourself.
Well, I didn't.
I might be misinterpreting it here. Maybe I'm just putting my own interpretation on how I actually feel about the situation, possibly. But because it's such an emotional thing, it is incredibly reliant on how your parents acted, because it imprints on you in that sense. You know?
Yes, but the point I was trying to make is that your memory is not necessarily a reliable measure of objective facts, but that doesn't undervalue or denigrate the feelings you have about those situations perceived by you. The point I was trying to make was, many of those situations you cannot objectively know to be true, and even the ones you can objectively know to be true, it doesn't serve you to continue to hold on to them and blame somebody else, whether it's your parents or anyone else, the bullies at school or whatever, because they're not going to change. They can't be changed by you. Only you can be changed by you. So it almost doesn't matter whether that your parents did it or didn't do it. What matters is, how do you move forward yourself? How do you become a whole and healed person, regardless of whether those things were only imagined by you or factually true?
Well, yeah, I was going to comment on that, the objective fact part, about how something actually happened in terms of your childhood. My argument is, does it even matter?
No, that's what I just said.
And that's what you said, is, and I completely agree with that. It doesn't really matter, because the effect of carrying that baggage, if you will,
absolutely,
is something that's felt today, now,
and it impacts you really,
and all the time. I mean, you might not be noticing it, but it certainly is. And I think it's worse if you don't notice it.
Yes.
Or rather, don't own it or choose to look at it.
Yes.
Like cleaning out the cabinets.
I
getting all those
it's sort of like
beans out of there.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. It's like looking in the cupboard and thinking, oh, wow, I've got lots and lots of food in this cupboard. And then as you go through it, you see that it's way past its use by date by like years. So actually all that stuff is an illusion. I think, it's a perfect moment to talk about how these memories and the emotions attached to those memories, what can you do about it? Whether all these things really happened, whether some of them really happened and the other ones were how you perceived, or whether some of them were just that you felt shame or embarrassment or anger or whatever in a given moment when no one else felt that. And for whatever reason that triggered that in you and you've carried it with you. it's impacting your life today. And the reason we know that it's doing that is because we've looked into this a lot individually and as a couple, and we've come to start practicing a kind of reimagining of our childhood as a form of healing.
Yeah, it's the let's say the basis of reality is that it is created right now. As well, you're listening to this in the future, so this is sort of like
but it's now. It's the
now.
eternal
It's
now
now. It's
that
the
everyone
eternal
talks
now.
about. Yeah.
You might be listening to this in the future after we've recorded this, but you'll be listening to it now.
But it's only our future.
No,
theirs.
that's what I'm saying. You're listening to it
amazing.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
You're always listening to it now.
Yes.
And that's that's a powerful thing to understand. And that's what the reimagining of things comes into play, is because, you understand the basis on which now is, which is right now. And the creation of that is completely impacted by everything that you're perceiving and experiencing knowingly and unknowingly.
Yes.
And the reimagining of that is sort of reverse engineering it and implanting the now from what you see.
Beautiful. I think that's really beautiful, because that also speaks to something I believe we've talked about before, which is that time and space are interwoven. There is no time without space, and more importantly, as you recently mentioned to me, there's no time without movement. I think it was St. Augustine.
St. Augustine from the City of God. So I was opening up a page. Can't remember what page number it is, but this is one of his last books, and he was mentioning time, how it's an existence, obviously separate of God. But he said the premise on which it exists is because motion exists.
Yes.
And motion allows time to exist.
Correct.
And vice versa.
And motion is also, you could say, change.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So the idea that we actually can play with time, and a perfect example of that is when we dream or imagine the future, or we recall the past. That's us putting ourselves into that place, future, past, and not now.
Yes.
So reimagining your childhood is very simply the idea of going back to the past in your mind's eye and creating that beautiful, positive, fulfilling perspective or perception that may or may not have been true, because on so many levels you don't know.
Yeah.
And one point I want to make is that children do not know their parents. Every child, I was a child obviously, we all think we know our parents because we see them so often and for so long. But of course, once you become a parent, you realize there is a whole world of you that your children do not see, because it's not appropriate or necessary for them to know those sides of you, private sides of you, or maybe profoundly intellectual sides of you until they become adults. Most of that is not suitable for children to know about their parents. And yet we grow up thinking, oh, my parents were this, that, they were mean and they were rigid and they were this. Well, we only know that one bit of them, and maybe they did beat us or whatever, but we very, very often don't know their history up until the moment they had us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I suppose the reason I say that is to kind of give a bit of credence and justify the idea of reimagining your childhood, because that the way you reimagine it might be what your parents actually wished for or what they dreamed of being. So it's not, I suppose what I'm saying is it's not invalid to try this.
No, absolutely not. And I guess you can essentially go about it in any way that you feel is right. I suppose it's a very personal thing. Knowing how to heal yourself. I think really you only know how to do that, but there are certain, let's say, elements of reality that you can essentially tap into that everyone shares.
Yep.
That being experience that really helps. And I think that their ultimate message is famous Ram Dass book, right? Be here now.
Yeah, but that's difficult, isn't it? Be here now, it can sometimes be great and easy, but other times when you're trapped in the memories of your childhood, you you're exactly not being here now, right? That's the point. So the idea of reimagining your childhood is, in essence, an act of letting go of the baggage, literally just getting rid of it, letting it go, letting it dissolve, and creating new and beautiful images and stories that actually serve you in order to heal you. And, I imagine some people might say, yeah, but it wasn't true. Well, as we've just discussed, your version of what was true is exactly that, your version. So why not try and create a different version of what is true and see the impact that could have in your life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some very, I guess, practical ways of looking at childhood.
Yes.
And understanding it, I suppose. What do you feel the impact of childhood has on you today?
Of the impact of the baggage from my childhood, or the positive stuff?
Yeah, well, both. I mean,
Okay.
I guess baggage is just that, right?
Right.
You're not attached to negative or positive feeling.
It's interesting,
to it,
isn't it? I suppose because we use the word baggage to mean that it's stuff that weighs you down and slows you down.
Sure.
The stuff you drag around with
But it
you.
might have water in there when you need it.
Well,
right?
I suppose the way I see it is the good things about my childhood, the things that my parents taught me or the people around me taught me, they have become integral parts of who I am. So one example would be that my mother was quite an intellectual woman who was very interested in ideas and philosophy and stuff, even though, she was just a regular suburban housewife. Because of her past before she became a mother, she could read Latin, she could read French, she could read Italian and English. But that was all her life before she became a mother. When she became a mother, her life was utterly different. And I only came to know some parts of her a little bit as I became an adult. So when I think about things like that, I think, well, they're really deep in me, love of reading that just doesn't go away, a love of learning that I almost don't shut off out of choice. And in the same way, of course, one would say that the negative things, the baggage, for example, her resentment. I'm speaking of my mother because obviously as a woman, I kind of model myself more on her. But, her resentment of being trapped in the suburbs, her resentment of having a husband who was not her intellectual match, those things also became a part of me, because you can't usually take one and not the other. You have to choose to let go of the things you don't want. So that's how my childhood has impacted me is, well, since I stopped blaming my parents for all my flaws, it's more now about trying to negotiate those things that serve me well without letting them try and control me. So, being brought up to do the housework in a certain way. Well, when I first moved out of home, I was really obsessive about keeping my house clean exactly the way it was done in my childhood home. Really, like, to the point of being unhappy and making other people unhappy, just uptight about it. So trying to find a medium path where I let go of the emotional charge of why I must keep my house clean that way. It was an emotional thing. And really finding the practicality out of it rather than just the emotionality from it. And that's on the upside. And on the negative side, those things about being resentful, like seeing my mother be resentful and feeling like, as a lot of women have, this issue of not being able to ask for what you want. So I developed that very young. I just decided I was never going to ask for things from quite a young age. So even things I really wanted, even things my parents would have allowed me, like, going on a school trip or whatever, I chose to not ask. And that's something that now I've been trying to self-help my way through that for a few years. But now I'm seeing that actually it's not an intellectual exercise, it's a memory exercise. I have to remodel the people on whom I model myself.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose the sort of baggage I carry is, in a sense, if I want to look at it intellectually, it becomes an archetypal sort of thing, and if I look at it personally, I stop understanding it.
Interesting.
It almost like it doesn't have meaning anymore.
It's too close.
It's too close.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I try and understand it from perspective of, well, what about the mother-son relationship? What about the father-son relationship? And there is no right way, but there is some patterns amongst certain archetypes, let's say, that do exist and exhibit themselves in the world. So that's why I was saying earlier as well that there is really no such thing as positive and negative baggage, according to me at least.
Interesting. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It's because, well, if you're going to let go, it doesn't actually matter what serves you or doesn't.
Right.
We were talking about this earlier in the transformation episode, I believe, which was around letting go and ultimate transformation, let's say, and transformation being something that is a total thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the eyes of transformation, and in the eyes of judgment, and in the eyes of God, let's say, there is no such thing as that. There's no such thing as that duality there that we attach to those baggages.
Yeah, true.
Right. So do I think things serve me? Yes. Do I think I've been impacted by my childhood in negative ways? Absolutely. It's how I perceive it to be.
Yeah.
I can't progress my love with this person because I'm blocking the relationship I have, or the relationship I perceive to have with my mother, for example. Right?
Yeah.
And to me, that is purely an intellectual exercise. And I'm sure, as probably most men, I actually would think, is the first step in approaching the emotional side of things.
Is what?
Is the intellectual.
Oh,
the
I
intellectual
see,
exercise,
yeah.
let's say. It's the one that's, well, at least for me, helps in approaching, touching that emotional side of things.
Yes, of course. Me too.
And yeah, I mean, I said men, but I probably would imagine women too, but I think of men more of a problem solving sort of.
I absolutely
let's go
agree.
about that.
I think
that way.
it's just our society's pushed us more to that. I think colder intellectual kind of processing.
Absolutely,
which is why there's the need to try and justify.
Yeah.
Our understanding
So
of whether we can reimagine our own childhood.
Yeah. So and that's a completely emotional thing, and that's why I think it's important to approach it from a feeling aspect, thinking, well, I'm not actually reprogramming the facts of what happened, because that's an impossible intellectual exercise, because it's contradictory to what, let's say, the scientific method deems the correct way, right?
Yeah, and it may not even be necessary.
And that's my point, I think, was that it's not necessary at all. It's to approach it from the feeling aspect and saying, I'm going to change the emotional past, because the emotion is eternal.
Yes.
Not the intellectual side.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the baggage antidote,
yes.
let's say,
so,
that I like to try and employ.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm perfect at it.
So how do you do it?
Well, sorry, I've not just been explaining that.
No, well, I suppose the reason I say that is...
Oh, you mean like actually...
The actual reimagining, because we recently went through an experience...
Oh, right, yeah.
Because, as I was saying earlier, I have tried for years to self-help my way through this.
Yeah.
And it's worked in parts, let's put it that way, in parts. But, I've recently experienced doing it under the guidance of, or to put it any other way, a professional, someone who's helped thousands of people to reimagine many aspects of their lives. And for some reason, that was super powerful. And maybe it's a matter of being ready and open and all of those things, or maybe it's a combination of finding yourself with someone who can really help you in that way. But that's why I was asking, how do you actually do it? Because she's very practical.
Oh, why don't you tell the listeners this person's, her credentials, let's say.
Okay, well, this lady is someone who was introduced to us by Lada Duncheva, who has the Astrolada channel and business. She's an astrologer, but so much more. And she introduced this lady, Natalia. I believe her surname is Kopilinka or Kopilinkaya. But we'll put a link below.
Yeah.
But essentially, this lady, Natalia, is a psychologist. She's a business psychologist. She does business psychology as well as personal relationship psychology and counseling. She's a specialist in essentially helping people's relationships.
Yeah.
And she'll start with you individually. And we were part of a webinar.
Yeah.
And it was incredible.
Yeah, just check her stuff out. I think it's really powerful mind tools that she'll give you. This
but not
Seps has been a giant
tools.
Endorsement, basically, but
Well,
it got us thinking a lot about the nature of childhood and how it plays a role in our lives in such subtle ways a lot of the times, and it gave us a pause to think about it, and I really appreciate coming across people like that that allow you to think more openly about certain things,
but not in an intellectual way. I think that was what was beautiful.
Yeah, it's true.
Because she talked a lot about just approaching the subconscious mind. And of course, this isn't new. I've heard about this many times. It's like positive thinking and affirmations and this and that. But I think what was really special about her approach is she's Eastern European, so she's pretty blunt. She doesn't tiptoe. She doesn't hold your hand and pat it and stuff. She basically takes you straight to the beginning, which is close your eyes, imagine your parents talking to each other. And then now imagine them being loving to each other, kind to each other. Imagine your father being, supportive and financially prosperous and just a strong, beautiful, warm example of what it is to be a father. And imagine your mother being that warm, loving, caring, giving, and adoring wife. And again, these are some challenging things because I've basically said loads of stereotypes right there, and people are going to freak it.
Also, a lot of things that people don't perceive to be the reality. I think some people don't imagine their parents to ever be like that because the reality of the situation isn't so.
Correct.
And
that's my case.
That's a lot of people's cases, but I think it's a powerful individual unlocking tool.
Amazing.
So it
is amazing to be able to really in your mind. I think it because you're dealing with something so sensitive as your own experience, your childhood experience of your parents and their relationship to each other, not even their relationship with you.
Yeah. That
when you see it in its full technicolor glory in your mind, and it feels so real, that's what's crazy. That you literally do rewrite your own history, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that very much impacts the now.
Yes.
And that's what we were trying to get at, I suppose. Or I'll speak for myself. That's what I was trying to get at out of this sort of intellectual exercise, let's say. But I think that's all the time we have today. It's not childhood length, but it'll get you started.
Exactly. Just imagine your childhood with the loving, caring, prosperous, stable parents that you maybe didn't have.
Yeah.
And just see how it makes you feel.
Yeah. It's
exciting.
It's exciting.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And have a lovely day, everyone. We'll catch you in the next episode. Peace be with you.
Yeah, God bless you. Bye.
Bye.